Coming off of the success of Yakuza 0 and Yakuza Kiwami, a remake of the original Yakuza with the Yakuza 0 engine, Sega has finally graced North America with Yakuza 6: The Song of Life. And before I go any further, I should probably disclose that while I do own nearly all of the games, I've only played bits and pieces of them, and my only real extensive experience with this series prior to this new one is with last year's Yakuza 0, which I loved, and I'm told by veterans of the series is more than enough to get a good idea of what the series is all about. Yakuza 0 was truly awesome. It fell just short of being on my top 5 games for 2017, and if it weren't for Resident Evil or Sonic Mania, it probably would have been on there. As of the date of this recording, Yakuza 6 has only been out a little while, so to avoid spoilers, I'll only be showing very little footage of Yakuza 6 beyond the first couple of hours or so. So don't worry if you don't want the story ruined, you should be safe watching this review. Although if you are on the fence about this game, I can make things really simple for you. Just go play it. Even better, if you have access to Yakuza 0, play that first, as I do feel like it set things up nicely for me going into the newest installment. Even though there are several games in between them, story-wise, Yakuza 6 seems prepared for my situation, as there are a lot of nice little summaries of the previous games in the main menu that flesh out the main points of the other games if you want that. This is a nice touch, and it really makes Yakuza 6 feel accessible for Yakuza fans of all degrees. Yakuza 6 generally revolves around an older Kiryu and his journey to hunt down the attacker of somebody very close to him, Haruka, who was staying at an orphanage that Kiryu founded years ago. And all of this is set up in a great opening, which is perhaps the best part of the game story-wise. The children of the orphanage are so well developed in such a short amount of time. It shows that the creators behind this series really have mastered storytelling at this point. I really enjoyed seeing these colorful personalities interact with each other, and Kiryu as he's released from prison and sees them for the first time in several years. It's a really touching scene, and it really comes together to make a very strong opening for the game.
今度はそう長くは待たせねえ。俺もはるかも。
Now, as is to be expected in a Yakuza game, the story ends up being much deeper and complicated than it lets on in the beginning, and that's all I'll basically say about it. Although, I will add that while I did enjoy certain parts and certain characters quite a lot, and it is done well, I didn't find it to be as consistently captivating as Yakuza 0, and I doubt you will either. While the creators of this series are surely some of the best in the business, make no mistake about it, Yakuza 6 does tend to give the impression sometimes that maybe the series is starting to get a little long in the tooth when it comes to the story. What's worse, I wasn't particularly fond of the ending either, so Yakuza 6 ends up being a game where you should really just enjoy the journey and not get too hung up on the destination, which is a fine way to play it, as the massive amount of mini-games, arcades, quirky side quests, and other distractions are all as fun as they've ever been and really bring out the personality of the game. Yakuza 6 totally met my expectations in that regard. While the story might not live up to 0 in my opinion, many other aspects of the game exceed 0. Most immediately noticeable is the new graphics engine, which looks awesome, and it gives me that current gen feeling that 0 and Kiwami didn't quite give me. Also, load times when you enter a store or a restaurant are all gone, making the world feel real and seamless. And you also have a seamless transition into the street fights, and all of this adds up to a much more polished open world game feeling than the previous games have. Speaking of combat, while I was sad to see the different stances from 0 go away, I did ultimately get acquainted with the much more intuitive upgrade and skill learning system of 6 very quickly. In a lot of ways, the system of Yakuza 6 makes more sense in my opinion, and does feel much more rewarding and progressive the deeper you go into it, although it might feel slightly more shallow to some. And the combat itself does feel pretty similar to previous games, and perhaps it's a bit easier in some ways too, but overall the control scheme, the speed of combat, and overall flow of the fights feel pretty unchanged for the most part as far as I could tell, which isn't a bad thing if you liked it. If you're looking for something deeper and more complex than previous games, you might be a little disappointed, but honestly at this point I don't know why you would be expecting that. I really appreciate the arcade style fighting that doesn't take itself too seriously but also manages to keep you on your toes. Not many games have this type of fighting anymore, and it's nice to see that Yakuza is preserving it and only changing small things when it feels absolutely necessary. All of the essential facets to Yakuza combat are here, and if you've ever enjoyed it, you'll enjoy it here too. The voice acting is top-notch as well, making the characters feel just as real and believable as they ever have.
我々マフィアにアジア界で閉じこもっているとでも言うのでしょう。
ああ。その代わり、今度こそアジア界はあんたらの島だと認める。ボスにはこう伝えてくれ。今後アジア界以外の場所で中国人マフィアが姿を見せたら、うちは容赦なくやらせてもらうとな。
While Yakuza 6 for most won't quite live up to last year's Zero and Kiwami, and possibly a few other games in the series, it's by no means a sleeper of a game. What you have here is an important installment of the series for many narrative reasons, and even though it doesn't shake things up as much as perhaps it could have, being the 6th main game in the series, it's still Yakuza, and it's still very Sega, and therefore it's still a great game. It's one of those games that you do have to force yourself to put down, as no point feels like a good place to stop, because there's always an event feeding into a new one. I know a lot of colossal first-party Sony exclusives are on the way this year and next year, and Yakuza 6 will probably get trampled by them very soon, but for now, I think Yakuza 6 deserves its moment in the spotlight. So if you got it, grab a glass from that collector's edition, fill it up with some bourbon, settle in, and enjoy a great game.